Hi Mindsetters, and welcome to another Grade 11 Learn Extra accounting lesson. Today's topic is going to be the very important topic of Creditors Reconciliations. This topic, Mindsetters, is very similar to a topic that you already know and that you are familiar with, bank reconciliation. But it's also something that you're going to carry through to your grade 12 year, so it's something that you're going to need to understand in grade 11 and master in grade 11, so that next year when you're in matric, the workload becomes so much less because you've already mastered an important section of the syllabus. So today we're going to look at some key concepts, and specifically we're going to understand the need for a creditors reconciliation. In other words, why are we wasting our time or spending our time doing this? There has to be a reason for us to do our accounting, and we're going to see today what the need is to do such a creditors reconciliation. Secondly, we're also going to look at the similarities between your creditors reconciliation and another topic that I'm sure you all know how to do, bank reconciliation. Really, Mindsetters, what you need to remember is that a creditor is a person that we owe money to. So in other words, it's a person that we've bought stock from and we owe them money, we're going to have to pay them back. How is that similar to a bank? Well, remember, you know that you can sometimes go into overdraft. If you go into overdraft, you've spent more money than you have. So actually, you owe the bank money, so you can see the bank as a type of creditor. So what you will learn from today's show is that bank reconciliation and creditors reconciliation are two very similar concepts, and if you understand one, the chances are that you'll understand the other one very well as well. Then, of course, Mindsetters, we're going to get to the whole important point of preparing a creditors reconciliation statement. Remember, in accounting, you have to prepare various statements like income statements, bank recon statements, balance sheets, and today we're going to teach you a new one, a creditors reconciliation statement. That's the whole objective of reconciling your creditors. And then finally, what's also important is to update your creditors control account in the general ledger, because your creditors control account is exactly what the name implies. It's something that keeps control of your creditors. It measures or it records how much money we owe our creditors at a specific time. But I'm sure you all know that by now, because in grade 10 you had to do the general ledger in a lot of detail. So today you're going to apply some of that grade 10 knowledge to the grade 11 concept of creditors reconciliation. Now let's have a look at some of the important theory that you're going to need to revise and that you're going to need to cover. So the first thing that's important is that the creditor sends out what we call a statement of account. The creditor, remember that's the person that we owe the money to, is going to send us at the end of every month a statement of account which tells us, listed in columns, how much money we owe that creditor at the end of the month. Obviously, if you have somebody who owes you money, you need to send out regular reminders to keep them knowing that they owe you some money, and you need to work out how much money they owe you at the end of every month. You've done this before in grade 10. In grade 10, you remember your creditors ledger. You started with an account rendered, and you also did an account rendered for your debtors ledger. Now, those accounts rendered in the debtors ledger have to be sent out to your debtors to remind them how much money they owe you. In this case, you are the creditor, and you are sending reminders to the debtor to let them know how much money they have to pay you. They are going to look at that statement and they are going to do a reconciliation with their own creditors ledger. Remember, it's the same thing if you've got a sister and you're a male, your sister has got a brother and you have got a sister. The same way, debtors and creditors work in interchangeable ways. If you are my creditor, I am your debtor. You're my creditor because I owe you money, and I am your debtor because I'm a person who owes you money. Remember that, and make sure you don't get confused between what a debtor is and what a creditor is. So what we need to be aware of is that we keep track of our creditors in a special account which is known as the creditors control account. I want to ask you to think for a few seconds, what type of account is a creditors control account? Is it an asset? Is it a liability? Is it an income? Is it an expense? What is it? Think carefully about it. Sure, you've got the answer by now. A creditors control account is a liability account because it keeps track of the money that we owe our creditors. And what's more, it keeps track of how much is owed to all our creditors in total. So it's the grand total of everything that we owe our creditors at the end of a specific period. You'll also remember, just a recap of grade 10 work, a recap of some of the grade 10 work that you have covered. The creditors control account is for all your creditors, and you keep individual accounts of each of your separate creditors in a different book, which is called the creditors ledger. So remember, the creditors control account is for all your creditors, but the creditors ledger is for individual creditors. And that's our next point over there. It says that the balance of an individual creditor's account is recorded in his or her creditor's ledger. What's very, very important to remember, mindsetters, is that your creditors control account has to balance with all of your individual creditors. So you add up all your individual creditors at the end of the month and get a total, and that total has to match your creditors control account in the general ledger. Individual creditors have to add up to the total. If they don't, then there's something wrong, and you would have to go and check all of the different transactions, not only in your CJ, in your CAJ, in your CPJ, in other words, all the different journals, but also how you've posted them to the general ledger, and also what you have done in your books for your individual creditors. That is why it's called a creditors control account, because it helps you control your creditors. It helps you find out if there is a problem. And once you found out that there's a problem, that some entry has not been recorded correctly, you just fix it and make sure that the total balances. Now, what we need to understand is that creditors reconciliation, just like bank reconciliation, is what we call an internal control procedure. I'm sure you've studied the section in your textbook on internal control, which explains to you that a business is going to put controls in place to make sure that bad things don't happen, to make sure that there is no fraud, to make sure that money is not stolen, to make sure that money does not go missing or disappear. We would have lots and lots and lots of different types of internal controls. For instance, you might put a camera in your storeroom to check that nobody is stealing your stock. Or you might make sure that your workers are doing their jobs by putting in one of those clocking systems, making them sign in and sign out every day. Creditors reconciliation is another example of internal control, and the whole purpose of this is to check that our creditors are not overcharging us. If you think that you owe a shop 100 Rand and suddenly they send you an account for 1,000 Rand, you're going to get a huge fright, because that's 900 Rand more than you think you owe them. However, if you've kept track of what you owe your creditors and you do a creditors reconciliation, as I'm going to show you later on, you're going to be able to account for the differences between what you think you owe the creditor and what the creditor thinks you owe the creditor. That's very, very important, because if somebody's made a mistake, that mistake has to be corrected. Otherwise, you might end up paying that creditor the 1,000 Rand, and then you've lost 900 Rand because you didn't do your bookkeeping, you didn't do your accounting correctly. So, the whole purpose of it, you may have heard of the word reconciliation before. Reconciliation, we've had in bank reconciliation. When you reconcile something, you sort of bring it together. You make sure that your balance in your books matches what the creditor thinks you owe the creditor in the creditor's books. You bring the two balances together, and then you say that they are reconciled. So the whole purpose is that we are trying to check that what we think we owe the creditor actually matches the statement, so that we agree, we are reconciled, that this is the amount that we have to pay our creditors. Now, very importantly, just like with bank reconciliation, there are two types of errors. There are two parties in this transaction. There's me and there's my creditor. In your accounting terms, it's the business whose books you're doing and the business that our business owes money to. In other words, the creditor. Two types of people, or two different groups of people, they can each make mistakes. We're only human. We often make mistakes in recording things. So there are two types of errors. Either it is an error that we have made, or it is an error that the creditor has made. So it's either us or the creditor. What you need to bear in mind when doing creditors reconciliations, if we have made the error, then there's something wrong in our books. Our creditors ledger is wrong, our general ledger is wrong, and some of our journals are wrong. All of them are wrong. So what we have to do is we correct the error in our own books. We fix up our creditors ledger, and if necessary, we fix up our general ledger, so that we know that what we owe the creditor is correct. However, if the creditor has made the error, we are not the accountant of our creditor. So we can't just go and make entries in our creditor's general ledger or in our creditor's ledger. Obviously, they won't let us have access to their books because they've got accountants to do that sort of thing. So what you must bear in mind is that if the creditor has made the error, what we do is we include this error in the creditor's reconciliation statement. We show what error the creditor has made and fix it by recording it in the creditor's reconciliation statement. I'm sure that this rings some bells with another section of work that you've done. In other words, the bank reconciliation statement. You'll remember, when you're doing bank reconciliation, two possible things can happen. Either it's an amount that we haven't recorded, for instance, some bank charges or some interest or some debit orders or stop orders, or it is something that the bank hasn't recorded, like an outstanding deposit, like an outstanding check, or something like that. Once again, same procedure. If we've made the mistake, we are going to update our journals, we're going to make the entry in the CPJ or in the CRJ or in our bank general ledger. Just like here, when we have made the mistake with creditors reconciliation, we update our own books in the creditors ledger and in the general ledger. However, in bank reconciliation, if the bank has made the mistake, all we can do is list it as an outstanding deposit or an outstanding check on the bank reconciliation statement. We don't have access to the bank's books. We can't change them. Same as this, if the creditor has made the mistake, then we're going to make the entry on the creditor's reconciliation statement. I'm sure that you've understood that important concept, and a very, very important thing to remember is that the creditor's reconciliation statement, just like the bank reconciliation statement, is prepared from the creditor's point of view. You know that with bank reconciliation, on the bank statement, credits are positive and debits are negative. It's the reverse of what we have in our own books. The same thing applies to the creditor's reconciliation. Anything that increases our account with a creditor is going to appear on the debit side of the creditor's reconciliation statement. That's very important because this is done from the creditor's point of view. And in the creditor's eyes, we owe them money. Therefore, to them, we are a debtor. If you remember your accounting terminology, you will know that debtors are assets to the business. So we are an asset to that creditor. We owe that creditor money. What that means, any entry that makes us owe that creditor more money, that creditor is going to record that entry on the debit side of our account because we're their debtor and we owe them more. In the same way, any entry that decreases our account will go on the credit side because it's an asset to that creditor that has now gone down in value. It's as if we've paid some money back. The credit side goes down if you're a debtor. So any negative entry will appear on the credit side of the creditor's reconciliation statement. And then just like bank reconciliation, only the very last line would be prepared from our point of view. So in those ways, it's very, very similar to the bank reconciliation statement. Think back to your bank reconciliation statement. You have the balance as per bank account. Sorry, you start off with the balance as per bank statement, which is the amount that the bank thinks you have. Then you do your outstanding checks and your outstanding deposits, and at the very end, you've got the balance as per the bank statement, which is the one that's prepared from your point of view. So just remember that, and you shouldn't have any problems. Always think about whose point of view you're preparing the account from. After you've done the creditors reconciliation statement, what then? Well, you need to follow up to check that any errors or any omissions that the creditor has made are corrected. We would need to phone the creditor and we'd need to say to them, I'm sorry, you've made a mistake with this invoice, or you've made a mistake with this debit note, or you've made a mistake with this check that I've sent you. Please fix it because we don't owe you that money, or we owe you more money than you think we owe us. Very, very important that you follow up and check next month that the creditor has processed those entries so that you and the creditor agree on what you owe them. So this is exactly the same as in a bank reconciliation statement, where you follow up on what the errors that the bank has made, or on the outstanding checks or on the outstanding deposits. You make sure that that outstanding deposit reflects on your bank statement, and you make sure that those outstanding checks eventually are paid out of your bank account. It's important to follow up so that you can keep track of the finances of your business. You'll see that the notes include a short glossary, and the glossary is just for you to understand some of the terms that are used. I'm not going to go through everything, except I want to just draw your attention to two important differences, or one important difference between the creditor's statement and the creditor's reconciliation statement. Please don't get these two confused because they sound almost the same. There's a creditor's statement and a creditor's reconciliation statement. I'm going to link it to bank reconciliation, and I'm going to tell you that the creditor's statement is like the bank statement, whereas the creditor's reconciliation statement is like the bank reconciliation statement. So the way it works is as follows. The creditor's statement is the piece of paper or the email that you get from the creditor at the end of the month, which tells you you owe them so much money. And it'll have a balance at the bottom which tells you how much you owe them. That's exactly the same as the bank statement, which is that sheet of paper that you get which tells you how much is in your bank account according to the bank's records. Then, the creditor's reconciliation statement is the statement that you prepare to show the differences between your books and the creditor's books. So you're reconciling the balance on the creditor's statement with your own books to get a total of what you think the creditor is owed, or what you think you owe the creditor. In the same way, the bank reconciliation statement shows what outstanding checks and deposits there are so that you get to the same balance that you and the bank agree on what you should have in your bank account. Please pay careful attention to the differences between those two because you don't want to confuse them in an exam situation. Okay, now that we've looked at the various theory, we're going to get to a practical example where we are actually going to do a creditor's reconciliation. So let's have a look at the question that we have here. It says, read the information relating to Rhonda's roses in the information booklet and answer the questions that follow. It tells us here that we must complete the account for Rhonda's roses in the creditor's ledger. So we've got here an account for Rhonda's roses which we are going to complete according to the model that they're going to show us. Then the second part of the question simply asks us to draw up the reconciliation for this account. So this over here is a creditor's reconciliation. Two parts that we have to do: update our own creditor's control account, and then secondly, draw up the reconciliation. This is exactly the same as a bank reconciliation question where you first update the bank account in your general ledger, work out your new balance, and then use that new balance to prepare the bank reconciliation. So let's have a look at the information. Information says that Barry Bloomingdale, the internal auditor of Bloom and Dale Nurseries, had a look at the accounts prepared by Daisy, the bookkeeper. Below is the creditor's account of Rhonda's roses for June 2011. So we'll see here, this Rhonda's roses account is a slightly different way to the way you normally see it. Remember, you must be prepared in an exam situation to encounter questions that might be asked in a slightly different way, because sometimes people have got slightly different ways of doing their bookkeeping. But the concepts in accounting are always the same, and they're applicable to all of these different situations. You just need to try and identify what's going on. So let's have a look at what this question tells us. This document that we have in front of us is the creditors account of Rhonda's Roses for June 2011. So what we have here is a whole lot of entries on the credit side and a whole lot of entries on the debit side, and I'm just going to put in the pluses and the minuses because I know that that always helps me when answering a general ledger type of question to know on which side an account goes up and on which side the account goes down. They've told us that Rhonda's Roses is our creditor, and we said previously that creditors are liabilities, so they go up on the credit side and down on the debit side. That's why I've put my plus over here and my minus over there. Let's have a quick look at these different entries. You can see here, this is the opening balance of 2,000 Rand. It's what we think we owe Rhonda's Roses at the beginning of the month on the 1st of June. Then there are a whole lot of things that increase this account over here. So you can see here is a sundry account of 500, there are purchases of 3850, and there's a discount received of 330. Immediately when you see that, you should be thinking, aha, inexperienced bookkeeper. There's a mistake over here. Because we know that when we receive a discount, we have paid somebody in order to get that discount. So what that means is that that discount received should actually reduce our account with the creditor. In other words, this amount should appear on the opposite side. So already it should be ringing some alarm bells that the creditor's account is not correct and that the bookkeeper has made some mistakes. But let's have a look at the rest of the question and see what more they tell us. There are also purchases of 5,200 which have increased our account. If we purchased something from a creditor, we owe them more money. So this one is correct, it's on the right side. I'll just put a cross next to the discount because I want to remind you that that one is wrong. We have another discount which again the inexperienced bookkeeper has put on the incorrect side. Then we have more purchases which have increased our account by 4,500 Rand. If we purchase something from a creditor, again we owe them more, so this one is correct. And then finally there's a third discount. So of course this is a mistake that people sometimes make in accounting exams. If you make a mistake once, then you make the mistake everywhere. Same things happened here. This bookkeeper thought that discounts received should be recorded on the credit side of a creditor's account, but we know that they reduce what we owe them, so they should have been put on the debit side. Let's have a look now at the debit side, and the debit side, remember, has all the transactions which reduce our account. So we have bank from the CPJ. It's correct that this is going to reduce our account because if we are paying somebody from the bank, then obviously we owe them less money. If I go tomorrow and pay Rhonda's Roses 3,630 Rand, then I owe them 3,630 Rand less, so that amount should appear on the debit side of my account, which is the side where the amount goes down. The same thing is going to go for returns. Returns from the CAJ make my account go down, because if I've returned something to you, then I'm decreasing what I owe you. I haven't bought that stuff from you if I've given it back. Then we also have two more bank entries from the CPJ. The sundry account you never know because you have to be aware of what that transaction is. It could be a transaction that increases creditors' control, like interest that's been charged to you, or it could have been an amount that decreases creditors' control. For instance, a mistake or something that's happened somewhere. Then finally over here, we have the balance of 4386, which has been brought down here to 4386. So right now we think we owe Rhonda's Roses 4,386 Rand because we've taken into account all of the different transactions that have happened on their account for this month. Now, let's look at the second piece of information that we've been given. This is the statement that Bloomingdale Nurseries has received, and this piece of paper, very important not to forget this piece of paper is our statement, but the statement is prepared by the creditor. That is essential to remember. This piece of paper does not come out of our books. We are Bloomingdale Nurseries. This piece of paper has been prepared by the creditor, which is Rhonda's Roses. So what we have to bear in mind is that this is done from Rhonda's Roses' point of view. And in Rhonda's Roses' eyes, we, being Bloomingdale, are their debtors, because we are the people who owe them money. So what's very important to remember, and let me write it down here, is that a debit is going to be positive here and a credit is going to be negative. If you're a debtor, or if you record something in your debtor's journal, what would happen? Anything that makes that debtor's account go up is going to be a debit. Anything that makes that debtor's account go down is going to be a credit. So remember, they have prepared it from their point of view, so debits are added to the balance and credits are subtracted to the balance. We can check it in a very easy way. If you look at the balance at the beginning of the month, it's 2,300 Rand. Our very first entry that we have on the 6th of June was a sale. And that sale was put in the debit column for 3,850, and look at what's happened to the balance. The balance is now 6,150 Rand. The only way they can get to 6,150 from the original 2,300, they must have added the 3,850 Rand. So the truth is that Bloomingdale Nurseries owes us, or owes the creditor, more money after a sale, so the amount of 3,850 has to be added. Okay, now that we've got an idea of what the creditor's statement says, let's look at the bottom and see what they think we owe us. Here's the final balance on the 29th of June, and right there it says that we owe them 13,017 Rand. I don't know about you, but if I were Barry Bloom and I thought that I owed somebody 386 and they send me a bill for 13,017 Rand, it's almost 9,000 Rand more. I'd get a huge fright, especially if I don't know why that amount is so much. So, what are we going to do when we get this piece of paper from Bloomingdale Nurseries? Are we just going to go and draw 13,017 Rand from our bank account and pay them and say, thank you very much? Or are we going to say, hang on, there's a mistake here, because I think I owe you 4,386 and you think I owe you 13,000, I must do a creditors reconciliation to identify these errors and to bring the balances close together so that they are the same. So what we'd have to do in practice is we'd have to sit and tick off every single entry, compare it in the general ledger with the statements of Bloomingdale Nurseries, and check to see whether we agree. You've done exercises like that before with bank reconciliation statements where you compare your bank statement with your journals. In this case, though, the good news is that they've told us all of the information where there are differences. So that's what we have to check. So let's have a look and read the differences. Question goes on to say exactly what we've just discovered. Barry is of the opinion that they owe 4,386 to Ronda's Roses and not this amount of 13,017 Rand that appears on the statement. Please do the necessary reconciliation. If I were Barry Bloom, I'd be begging you to do that reconciliation because I don't want to pay that 9,000 Rand if I don't owe them that money. I need you as the accountant to explain to me why those amounts differ. So what you now do is you do an investigation and you get the following information. First of all, it tells us that during May, that's the previous month, there was a debit error of 300 Rand on the statement prepared by Ronda's Roses. So Ronda's Roses has made the error, and it says that this error is still not rectified. Let me go into more detail on what that means. They said that this happened during May, so that's going to be the opening balances of these various accounts. You can see on the 1st of June, we thought we owed Ronda's Roses 2,000 Rand. Remember, the last day of May's balance is brought down to the first day of June. So at the beginning of the month, we thought we owed them 2,000 Rand, but look at what's happened here. If we look at their statement, look at this. They think we owe them 2,300 Rand. There's a 300 Rand difference. So there was already a mistake last month. And we've been told that that was their mistake. It was a debit error of 300 Rand. In other words, a debit error from their point of view. In their column, a debit, you remember, we said was positive. So they charged us 300 Rand too much last month, and that error needs to be rectified. Ask yourself the question, who's made the mistake, us or them? Remember, if it's us, we must update our books. If it's them, it must go in the creditors' reconciliation statement. We've already seen that it's they who have made the error. So we must make the entry in the creditors reconciliation statement. Now let me show you, let's go back to our answer sheet and have a look at how the creditors reconciliation statement looks. Very important is that you can get two different types of creditors reconciliation statements. Sometimes they have two money columns and other times they have only one money column. The one money column is easier because instead of having debits and credits, you have positives and negatives. So this one here has got a column for the date on the right hand side. That's the column for the date, and that's the column for the day of the month. So your month goes here and your day goes here. Here's the column for the description, and look over there, we have only one money column. Only one money column. So that means that our format is not going to be with debits and credits, it's just going to be with positives and negatives. So I'm going to do it according to this format, and I'd encourage you to practice before you go into an exam situation. Take the same exercise and do it in the two-column method, where you have one debit and one credit. But the question's only asking us to do it in this way, so we're only going to have positives and negatives. So what you always do in the creditors reconciliation, you start with the balance as per the creditors statement. So let's write that in. And you'd also look and see on what day you received it, because that will be your date. We received that statement, the account was rendered on the 29th. You can put the 29th or you can put the 30th of June. You would normally put the end of the month because you're doing the reconciliation. Just like bank reconciliation, you do this at the end of every month. So let's write in here, June 30th. What are we going to put as the balances per the creditor statement? Well, that's easy. We just look at the bottom, and it's the amount that we think, it's the amount that they think we owe them of 13,017 Rand. So you can always put that in as your opening balance. So let me write it here, 13017. That's what they think we owe them. We're now going to make all the necessary entries that will fix this up so that we end up owing them the correct amount, and that we're also going to update our books to see how much we owe them as well. When you're doing a question like this, you actually have to do the two parts of the question together. So you shouldn't just go back and try and do the general ledger just first and finish it all, because you're going to find mistakes in both your books and the and the creditors books. If you're doing your books, it goes in the general ledger, and then it might be that the next entry has to do with the creditors books and must go on the creditors reconciliation statement. So very, very important. I want to emphasize, do the question as one whole thing. Don't just try and finish 1.1 and come back to 1.2. Enter the information as you see it so that you're able to finish the exam quickly without having to go back and read over things that you've already read. So let's have a look at what it tells us. Our first debit error said that there was a debit error of 300 Rand on the statement prepared by Ronda's Roses, and this error is still not rectified. So they think we owe them 300 Rand more than what we actually owe them, so we know that this has to go on the creditors reconciliation statement as an error that they have made. So the description is not that important. You have to write a description that demonstrates that you understand what the error was that was made. But there isn't always a set format for doing it. I always like to write correction of error, but then I'd like to put in whether it's a debit error or a credit error. Question tells us that this was a debit error where they have debited our account when they actually shouldn't have. So now that makes it clear that we should subtract 300 Rand to correct this error, and I've done it there, put it in brackets to make it very clear. Just note that if you're doing this in the two-column method, this is a correction of a debit error, so that 300 Rand would appear in the credit column of your two-column creditors reconciliation. Just going to say this once so that you remember it for this whole activity. Any number that I put in brackets, except the last number, which I'll get to at the end, every number that I put in brackets would go in the credit column if we had two columns. Every number that I don't put in brackets needs to go in the debit column. Once again, except the last number, but I'll show you that when we get there. So here's our correction of debit error. We have accounted for the fact that Ronda's Roses needs to reduce our account with 300 Rand. Let's have a look at the next piece of information. It says the sundry entry on the 3rd of June was actually a return from a debtor. Where's the 3rd of June? Let's look back at the information that we have. And we'll see that there was no entry in the statement from Ronda's Roses on the 3rd of June. We've just got the 1st and the 6th. So that's the error that we have made. So this sundry account on the 3rd of June, that was an error. That was a return by a debtor. And what we've done is we've, by mistake, put it into our creditors control account. So when we redraw our creditors control account, we must remember not to have that entry in there at all. We're just going to take it out, we're just going to cross it out and do nothing with it. It's gone. What we should really do in our books, if we're doing our real bookkeeping and not just an activity, is we should debit Ronda's Roses to cancel out that 500 Rand and then put it in the correct account, which is whichever debtor it is. The question doesn't tell us the name of that debtor because we don't have to do that in the question. All that they're asking us to do is to cancel it in the creditors ledger that we have because it should not appear over there at all. Our next piece of information says the following. It says Barry, that's us remember, has an agreement with Ronda's Roses that a 10% discount will be received on each check payment. In other words, every single time we pay them a check, we are going to get 10% off the amount that we owe. This is going to account for all of these different discount receiveds that we've had. So there was 3 discount receives that I've marked with crosses over there. Those are always our check payments. Every time we pay with a check, we get a 10% discount. But it tells us that the discount on the 10th is not related to any payment, and this discount needs further investigation. So obviously, we have made a mistake again, because if you look over here, here is the discount that they're talking about. This discount is not related to any check that we can see. If you look over here, on the 10th, there was, on Bloomingdale Nursery statement prepared by the creditor, they're speaking about a different amount. They're speaking about a discount of 363 Rand, which is another one that we've recorded. So the 330 does not relate to any payment, so it needs to be investigated. But what we know for now is that 330 Rand should not appear in this account of Ronda's Roses. We don't know what the error is at the moment, and the question doesn't tell us what the error is. But we do know that this amount should not be where it is. So I'm just going to cross it off this creditor's ledger because we're going to investigate the error, and that's not part of this question. The bookkeeper will investigate the error and see where else it needs to go and update the books accordingly. But we're only doing Ronda's Roses books, or we're only doing Ronda's Roses creditors ledger, so we're just going to scrap it from this creditors ledger because it should not be there. Let's look at information point number 4. It says, the returns of 1,870 on the 11th of June is in respect of another creditor. So not Ronda's Roses, it's another creditor. So once again, that should not have been included. Let's see if we can find it. Here it is, 11th of June. There's an amount of 1,870. The question tells us that that relates to a different creditor. They don't tell us who the creditor is because we're not doing all our books. We're only doing the creditor's control account for Ronda's Roses, and all it tells us is that this amount should not have been included. So once again, I'm just going to draw a line through it. We're going to disregard it when we work out our new balance. There's a second part of this question, though, and that second part says that the return on the statement should be for 342 Rand and not the 300 Rand shown. The return on the statement. Where's the statement? Well, look over here. Here's the statement, and they say that this return on the 11th should not be for 300 Rand. It tells us that it should be for 342 Rand. If you look at what happened in our statement from the creditor, it says that we returned for 300, but if you compare it to our books, it says 342. So the question tells us that our books are actually right. This 342 is the right answer, the 300 is the wrong answer, so once again, we need to figure out where it goes. Who has made the mistake? Have we made the mistake, or has the creditor made the mistake? Well, we see that the creditor's number is wrong, so the creditor has made the mistake. So we know that that 42 Rand has to go in our answer book in the creditor's reconciliation statement. So I'm going to write it in here so long. I haven't put a sign there, positive or negative yet, because we need to think about what has to happen. Look back at the information. We've said that this was a return. Here it tells us it is a return. It is a return of goods. So when we're returning goods to a creditor, we owe that creditor less money. And they have recorded it only as 300 Rand, whereas they should have recorded it as 342 Rand. So they need to reduce our account or credit our account, because remember, crediting means decreasing from their point of view, with an extra 42 Rand. So I'm going to just cross this one off to show that we've dealt with it. If we go back to the information, to the creditor's reconciliation statement, what we see is that we have to put that number in brackets because Rhonda's Roses needs to reduce or decrease our account by 42 Rand. And what we should write over there is correction of error. And I'm just going to put in brackets that this was for a return. Mindsetters, please bear in mind that very often a question will give you an invoice number, or it will give you a debit note number or a credit note number or a check counterfoil number. If you have that number, it's a good idea to write it in the reconciliation statement or the creditor's reconciliation statement so that the creditor can go and check their records to check to see what debit note it was. Remember, you keep proof of everything as a source document, and if you can fetch out the debit note that has that number, you've got proof to the creditor that you actually did return 342 Rands worth of stock instead of 300 Rands worth of stock. Remember, accounting teaches you life skills as well, and an important life skill that you should learn from an exercise like this is that it's important to hang on to your source documents, because you never know when you might need to return something to a creditor and have proof that that's what's happened. Let's have a look at the next piece of information. Next piece of information says that the sales of 2310 on the 19th of June on the statement are in respect of another customer. Let's have a look at what the statement says. This is the, let me just erase this one here. This is the error that we're dealing with now. It's the sales on the 19th of June for 2,310 Rand. And the question tells us that this is for another customer. So this Rhonda's Roses has by mistake charged us 2,310 Rand for stuff that we did not buy. They by mistake put it into our account with them instead of with another person who probably did buy it for 2,310 Rand. So once again, they have made the mistake. This is a mistake that if they've recorded it to the wrong person, they have to fix it. And the way they do that is they have to reduce our account with the 2,310 Rand. So the way they cancel out when they've increased it by 2,310 is they must reduce our account with 2,310 to rectify their error so that it cancels this amount out. Again, you ask yourself, who has made the mistake? Was it us or was it them? If it's us, we need to go up here and update our books. If it's them, we put it in the creditor's reconciliation statement. The question has told us that Rhonda's Roses has made the error, so it should be clear to you that we must go to the creditor's reconciliation statement. Here it is. And we have to put the amount of 2,310 Rand in here, and we could write a correction of an error, and I would put in something like a small description to state what the error was. I'm just going to write here, not on this account, because we need to show Rhonda's Roses that the error was made on a different account. They've put an amount that belongs in a different account in our account. That error is for 2,310 Rand. They've overcharged us, so I think it's obvious that we need to put this number in brackets because they have to reduce our account by 2,310 Rand. We still have quite a few adjustments to do, but I think you've done quite a bit of work so far. so I think that you deserve a break. We'll come back after this break and we'll look at transactions 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Welcome back, Mindsetters. I hope you enjoyed that short break. We're doing Learn Extra Accounting and we're with Creditors Reconciliation. We're getting to the second half of this question. And we're going to look right now at adjustment number 6, or reconciliation item number 6, which says that the sundry entry on the 20th for 350 Rand is in respect of interest that has been charged. So we need to look and pay careful attention as to what this question is asking us. Have a look over here. They're talking about the sundry entry on the 20th, which is for interest charged on the statement that Bloomendale Nurseries has prepared for us. That is interest that's been charged to us, and we've recorded it over here in the sundry account on the 20th in the general journal as 350 Rand. That's a problem, Mindsetters, because we have recorded interest that's been charged to us on the debit side of our creditor's statement. That is a mistake, because in our control account we should record items that increase our account on the credit side. We know that Rhonda's Roses is one of our creditors, and we know that when we owe Rhonda's Roses money or owe them more money, we make the entry on the credit side. So this amount of 350 Rand is actually on the wrong side. We need to move it to the credit side. So this is the first mistake that we have to deal with that appears in our creditor's ledger. So what we're going to do, let's make the entries that we have so far and put them in the ledger of Rhonda's Roses. So we're going back right here to the account for Rhonda's Roses in the creditor's ledger. I'm going to do them step by step and cross them out as I've dealt with them, because we have to know that the entries we're making are correct every step of the way. It's a very methodical, very slow process whereby you tick off everything and make sure that you record all the errors and fix up everything that's wrong. So you can see that they've already in the question given us this balance at the beginning of the month of 2,000 Rand. So they want to start us off with that balance, and we have to record all of the entries that affect Rhonda's Roses in the creditor's ledger on the correct side. Let's look at the information book. Here's our balance of 2,000 Rand. The answer book already contains that balance, so I'm just going to cross it out because we've dealt with it. We also have seen that there's a mistake on this sundry account of 350 Rand, and there's only one item that I've ticked off here that is correct so far, which is the return of 342. These two items we can already put in because our previous adjustments have shown us that our numbers are correct. Just to jog your memory, the returns was the one where Bloomendale Nurseries got it right. In other words, our amount of 342 Rand was correct. That was this previous adjustment, which was the adjustment number 4, which told us that the return on the statement should have been for 342 Rand, and we updated the account on the creditor's reconciliation statement. So our amount was correct, and so we can already enter that number in our books, the 342, and we can enter the sundry account in our books, but we have to fix it. So let's just do the return in the CAJ as it should be. I'll just write it on the first line. Remember, everything is done on the 30th of June because we're doing a reconciliation. We've got an amount here, returns in the CAJ for 342 Rand. That amount was correct. You can, if you like, put in the correct dates that we have on the statement, but it's not necessary because we're just doing the reconciliation at the end of the month. So now I've dealt with this item over here. Now we've been told that this item on the 20th, this one here, for 350 Rand, was for interest charged, and I already showed you that this number should appear on the credit side of Rhonda's Roses account. Why? Because now we owe them more money. If somebody charges me interest, I owe that person more money than I owed them before. So this 350 Rand, I'm going to put over here. We can just do everything on the 30th of June. And I will include this here as interest charged. Interest, remember, is charged to a creditor or charged by a creditor in the GJ. Very important for you to know that. and I'm going to put the amount of 350 Rand in here. I'm correcting the error, I'm putting it on the correct side. So now I've dealt with that adjustment. I've dealt with the amount of 350 Rand that appeared in the wrong place, so I'm going to get rid of it. You can see there are lots of items that I still have to do, but we're going to get to each one. Now, it tells us in adjustment number 7, the purchases of 4,400 Rand on the 26th of June in the account of Rhonda's Roses is an erroneous entry. They might even be testing your English a little bit here, that you have to know what the word erroneous means. If something is erroneous, it means it's an error, it is wrong. So that 4,400 Rand that appears in our account is an erroneous entry. Let's look back at it. It's in our account. Here it is, 4,400 Rand. And they've told us that this one should not be there. So let's just get rid of it. We don't need it anymore. Again, if we are doing a full set of books, we would need to update all the other relevant accounts in our general ledger. But because we're only doing a reconciliation for one account, we can just get rid of the entry and include only the entries that should be there. Our next one, number 8, says that the sales on the 29th of June on the statement were definitely for Bloomingdale. Let's look at the statement. Here it tells us that the sales on the 29th for 1,001 Rand were definitely for us. 1,001 Rand, remember that number, and let's see whether we've recorded it. This was a sale that we've made, it was a sale that Rhonda's Roses has made to us. So from our point of view, it is a purchase. So we should have somewhere in purchases an amount of 1,001 Rand, and I'm sure mindset is that you'll agree with me that it must appear on the credit side of the account, because the credit side of the account is the account where it goes up. So let's look on the credit side of the account to see if we spot anything that's got 1,001 Rand. No, there's absolutely nothing. So guess what? We've made the mistake. We haven't dealt with that sale correctly. We need to include that sale on the credit side of our account with Rhonda's Roses. Very easy to fix that. All we're going to do is go back to our account with Rhonda's Roses, fill in purchases in the where would you make a purchase from a creditor. Think carefully about which journal you'd use. Obviously it would be the creditor's journal, because the creditor's journal records when we purchase stock. And that amount is 1,001 Rand, which I'm just going to write in here. Once again, you see the principle that I spoke to you about at the beginning of this show at work. Anytime we have made the mistake, we must update our books. And in this case, they've told us that the statement was correct and we are wrong, so we have to fix it up by updating our books. So that is adjustment number 8 completed. Let's look now at adjustment number 9. Adjustment number 9 says, the payment on the 24th of June on the statement is recorded incorrectly, and this discount was incorrectly calculated. Oh dear, 2 mistakes that have been made by our creditor. How do we know it's by our creditor? Because of these words that appear here on the statement. The statement is wrong, our books are right. So the payment made on the 24th of June was recorded incorrectly by Rhonda's Roses. Let's have a look at it. Here's the payment we made on the 24th of June. It says bank 2,420 Rand. So we know that Rhonda's Roses is wrong, and we, as Barry Bloom of Bloomingdale Nurseries, are correct. So we know that this entry that we've made on the 24th, here it is, for 2,420, we know that that amount is correct. So the minute I see a correct entry, I'm going to put it into our general ledger to recalculate the balance. I can cross this one off and put it into our general ledger because it is correct. So 2,420 Rand. Let's go back over here. Just going to make that entry quickly. That was bank, CPJ, 2,420 Rand. So we know that we are right and Rhonda's Roses is wrong. So let's get rid of that amount of 2,420. Now we have to, of course, account for the mistake that Rhonda's Roses have made. So we can see that they've made this mistake over here, which I'm going to circle, 2,420. This 2,420 is a mistake. But why is it a mistake? Because it's 2,420. We agree that the amount is correct. Think carefully. If you look at the statement, you remember that if something is recorded on the debit side, it makes our account increase. But surely mindset is, if I've paid someone, it must make my account with them decrease, because I don't owe them that money anymore. I've now paid them. I owe them less. So look what they've done here. They've recorded the amount in the wrong column. This 2,420 should be here on the credit side. This is now an important thing to think about. How are they going to fix this entry up? If you look back to the 19th, all they did on the 19th is they charged us for this amount of 2,310 Rand, which I've already crossed out. That 2,310 Rand was charged to us when it should not have been charged to us. So the way we fixed it is we just got rid of it in our account and made them subtract 2,310 Rand in our Creditors Reconciliation statement. Here it is. But mindset is, this entry that we're doing now is not the same. Because not only should they have recorded a payment of 2,420, they actually recorded that we owe them 2,420 more, instead of decreasing our account by 2,420. So they've actually charged us when in fact we've paid them. So whenever you get an entry that appears on the wrong side of an account, and this is important, so listen carefully. Whenever you've got an entry that is put on the wrong side of the account, the way you fix that error is, firstly, you have to cancel out the wrong entry, which means we're going to make an entry of 2,420 Rand on the credit side. Now that's cancelled out, this amount of 2,420 has been cancelled out by the credit entry of 2,420. We've cancelled it and we fixed the wrong entry. But we still haven't recorded that we've paid them the 2,420. So in fact, we have to record an additional 2,420 on this side, because the first one was to cancel out the wrong entry that they've made, and the second one is correcting the entry by recording the payment that they should have recorded. So always remember this. Whenever an account has been recorded on the wrong side, if it's been recorded as a debit when it should have been a credit, the way you fix it is you credit it twice. You credit it once to cancel out the wrong entry, and you credit it a second time to record the entry that you originally should have been recording. If you record the entry only once, then all you're doing is cancelling out the wrong entry. You're not really recording the entry that you should have made. So that's important when doing creditors reconciliations. When you see something that was recorded on the wrong side, double it and put the amount on the correct side. So you see I have to make two entries of 2,420 over here. So I have to actually make 2,420 times 2. I must subtract 4,840 from the amount that they think we owe them. The way I do that must be done on the creditors reconciliation statement. I have to put the amount of, here it is, 4,840 Rand as a negative. Remember once again, and I'm going to stress this point because it's very important, the 4,840 is double the amount that they incorrectly added. They added 2,420 when they should have subtracted 2,420. So to fix that, we first have to subtract the wrong 2,420 that they've added, and then we have to subtract a further 2,420 to account for the fact that we've paid them. So the full amount should be 4,840, and we can write an entry such as a correction of error on wrong side. And mindsetters, you'll know this from experience, when you are completing a financial statement or when you're doing any accounting whatsoever, the examiner is going to want to see that you've done calculations. So what I would do here is I would just put in here 2 times 2,420 Rand, just so that the examiner can see that you know why you've calculated 4,840. It would be terrible if due to a silly slip of the pen you maybe leave out a 0, or you record 4480 instead of 4840. It can happen. It happens all the time. People make mistakes. But if the examiner can see that you knew how to calculate it, you might get part marks for the calculation instead of just getting it completely wrong because you've got the wrong answer in the money column. Remember that. It's a useful exam tip. Right, let's look back at the next adjustment. This is now the final adjustment, but it's quite a long one because it tells us the balance of the entries in the account of Rhonda's Roses, except for discount received, and in the statement of Bloomingdale are correct. So all the other entries in the account of Rhonda's Roses, except for the discount received and the statement of Bloomingdale, are correct. What we now need to do is just check to see that everything has been recorded, and the best way of doing that is to record them one by one. When you're doing an exam, record it and tick it off. So let's have a look at comparing the general ledger here with the statements. And you'll see here, here's the first payment that we haven't dealt with yet. It's 3,630. They've told us that this 3,630 Rand is correct, so I'm just going to fill it in here. Remember, it was in our bank account, so I'm going to make an entry here as I should, which is bank. You sometimes have to write small to fill it all in. CPJ 3,630. Let's have a look over here. There it is, 3,630. I'm going to cross it off. And at the same time, I'm just going to check to see that it does indeed appear on the statement. Here it is, 3,630. I can cross that amount off. Oh, I've just realized that I've forgotten the second part of adjustment number 9. So let's just come back to that crossing off section. I forgot to look at the second part of the question, which says that the discount was incorrectly calculated. So sorry, I'm just going to go back to adjustment number 9 here. Adjustment number 9 says that the discount was incorrectly calculated. In other words, the discount on this payment over here, let's do it in different colors so that you don't forget it, the discount on this 2,420 was incorrectly calculated. Here it is, the discount is 121 Rand. They have entered it in the correct column. They've put it on the credit side like they should have, because remember, a discount reduces your account with a creditor. If somebody gives me a discount, I owe them less money. So this 121 was incorrectly calculated. Why? Well, let's look back to see where we have information about a discount, and the information about a discount was given to us right here in adjustment number 3. It says that Barry has an agreement with Rhonda's Roses that a 10% discount will be received on each check payment. So once again, every single time I pay a check, I'm going to get an extra 10% off. This is a discount because my creditor wants me to pay the money that I owe. So this discount was incorrectly recorded, and let's have a look and see why it is incorrect. It should have been 10% of the amount that I've paid. And we know that the amount that I've paid is this 2,420 Rand. Let's calculate it. Calculation is going to be to take my 2,420 Rand, working out 10% of something means you multiply by 10 and divide by 100, and the answer comes to 242. So what they should have done is they should have recorded, this is Rhonda's Roses now, our creditor, they should have recorded an amount of 242 in the credit column. They've given us a discount, so they should reduce our account by 242. But they haven't. Look what they've done. They've recorded only 121 Rand. So they've recorded much less of a discount than what we actually got. So the way we fix that is we go to our calculator and we see they should have recorded 242, but they've recorded only 121. If we subtract that, we see that they need to record an extra 121 Rand. Again, we ask ourselves the question, when we're doing creditors reconciliation, whose mistake is it? Is it mine or is it the creditor's? If it's mine, I do it in my books. If it's the creditor's, I have to put it in the creditors reconciliation statement. So this 121 Rand is a mistake that the creditor has made. The creditor needs to reduce our account by a further 121 Rand. So it's got to go in the creditors reconciliation statement. Here's the creditors reconciliation statement. On the next available line, I'm going to record that 121. Because it is a discount that they should have recorded, I'm putting it in brackets, because brackets mean that they are reducing our account. And what we could do something here is write correction of error, and you could write something like discount incorrect, or discount incorrectly calculated if you have the space. Remember, once again, if you've got proof that you've paid and you've got the receipt, or you've perhaps got the check counterfoil, you could write the number in there so that the creditor can go and check her receipt to check to see that the amount is indeed correct. And if they check their receipt, then they'll see, oh, I'm sorry, we've made a mistake, and they will adjust your account accordingly. Okay, let's get back to adjustment number 10. Adjustment number 10 is still the one which says that all the other entries, the balance of the entries on the account of Rhonda's Roses and on the statement are correct. So what I'm doing is I'm just ticking them off and recording them in our books as we should. So our next entry happened on the 6th. Here is a purchase for 3,850 Rand. So we've been told that that statement entry is correct. So I'm going to just record it in my books as I should, 3,850 on the credit side. Going back to my creditors account here. So because that was a purchase in the CJ, we're recording 3,850 Rand over there. Just check that that was the right amount in the information booklet, 3,850. It's that pink one that I've just crossed out. And let's check to see that Bloomingdale Nurseries has recorded it. There it is. It's the sale for 3,850. Once again, remember, if I purchase from the creditor, in the creditor's eyes, the creditor has made a sale. So they will record it on the debit side, whereas I record it on the credit side. If you understand that concept, you can never, ever, ever make a mistake on which side to put the different amounts. Okay, let's go to the next one. We've got another purchase for 5,200 Rand, which happened here on the 15th. Let's have a look to see where it must go. Because it's a purchase that I've made for 5,200 Rand, I'm just going to record it here. Purchases in the CJ for 5,200 Rand. And let's look again to see whether the creditor has recorded it. I'm going to cross it off here on the 15th. Let's have a look at the information that I've been given. Here we go. On the 15th there was a sale for 5,200 Rand. The creditor has recorded it, so I'm going to get rid of it. Oh, and by the way, I'm also going to cross out this interest charged, because remember we did that adjustment as well. And we also did this adjustment of 1,001 Rand. If you can't remember where the interest charged and the amount of 1,001 Rand are, have a look over here. We've already recorded them of 350 and 1,001. We've put those entries into the account of Rhonda's Roses. So I'm just crossing them off to show that we've dealt with them. Okay, our next item that appeared here was the discount received. Remember the first discount received, in other words this one here, we'd already crossed off because that was not supposed to be in the account at all. The second discount received is for 363 Rand, and if we look at the creditor's statement, we see here is a discount for 363 Rand. So the creditor and us both agree that there was a discount of 363 Rand. But as I said at the very beginning, remember we made these 3 green X's next to those 3 amounts. Those amounts are on the wrong side, because if I receive a discount, my account goes down. It decreases. I owe that person less money. So this 363 should actually have been recorded on the opposite side. So let's fix it up by taking the 363 and recording it on the correct side. When we go over here, discount received. Now I have another question for you. We need to say which journal this would have been entered in. Little trick question. I hope you remember that you only get a discount when you pay somebody. So the only journal that can be relevant here must be the CPJ, because the CPJ records when we pay people money. So remember, your CPJ has got a column for discount received. Remember, it has creditors control and discount received together, just like your CRJ, which has debtors control and discounts allowed together. So make sure you remember that the entry should be the CPJ, and it was 363 Rand, and you'll see that this inexperienced bookkeeper did not record CPJ over here. Maybe if she had recorded CPJ, she would have known that items from the CPJ must decrease what we owe the creditor and should go on the other side. But now we fixed up this entry, so I'm going to cross it out, and I'm going to go over here, and that entry I'm going to cross out as well. We're almost done, not very many left to do. Just going to erase this 242 so that it doesn't confuse us, and I'm also going to cross out the 121 because we've dealt with that particular adjustment already. And can you see we've in fact dealt with all of the adjustments on Bloomingdale's nurseries. Let's look at this next discount, and this discount of 405 Rand, this mindset is a bit of a problem because there are two mistakes here. Number one, the discount is on the wrong side, and number two, nowhere on Bloomingdale's nursery statement from Rhonda's Roses do we see an amount of 405 Rand. Now, this is quite important for you to realize, because all that this means is that the creditor has not yet recorded that 405 Rand, and what's more, they've also not recorded the 4,050 Rand that appears here. That was the bank amount. 4,050 Rand was paid to the creditor on the 30th, and we still got a discount of 10% of that, which, remember, to work out 10% the easy way, you just knock off a 0. If you knock off a 0 from 4050, you get 405. So these two numbers that I've circled in pink here were not recorded by Rhonda's Roses. Why were they not recorded? Have they cheated us out of a payment? Well, what you must remember is that this statement, the last entry that appears on the statement, I'm going to show you here, last entry that appears on the statement happened on the 29th. And we made this payment on the 30th, so obviously we can't expect them to have recorded it yet, because they've probably printed the statement on the 29th, put it into an envelope and sent it to us. So they've not yet recorded that payment of 4,050 Rand or that discount of 405 Rand. And we need to fix it up, because we need to draw their attention to the fact that there's a payment outstanding that they haven't recorded and a discount that they haven't recorded. So once again, the creditor has made the mistake in this question, not us. Our books are correct. It tells us that all our other entries are correct apart from the discount received, so we have to update the creditor's statement. So there are two things that we need to do with this adjustment. The first thing that we need to do is put the discount on the correct side and make these entries, these two entries, in our general ledger. Let's do that first. So we have an entry that says bank. We have an entry that says bank over here in the CPJ for 4,050 Rand. And we have another entry that says discount received on the correct side this time. And we know from the previous example that that's also in the CPJ, and that is an amount of 405 Rand. So that's the first part done. The second part, though, is to make sure that these two numbers also appear in the statement that's prepared by the creditor. We don't want them to ignore that payment of 4,050 Rand, because we've paid them. We want them to acknowledge that, and we want them to subtract that amount from their account. So once again, this is an error that they have made or something that they have left out. So to fix it, we need to go to the Creditors Reconciliation statement. So once again, we don't always want to accuse them of making errors. I would rather say something like payment not reflecting, or payment not yet recorded, or payment that does not appear on the statement. And that was an amount of 4,050 Rand. And because it was an amount that was a payment, that needs to reduce our accounts. So what I'm going to do is put it in brackets. That's the payment. Once again, I'm just going to cross this off to show that I've now dealt with this payment of 4,050. The final thing I have to deal with is the discount receipt for 405 Rand, which they must record. So the way I will do it is record something like discount not yet recorded, or discount not reflecting, or something similar like that, and that's 405 Rand. And once again, because it's a discount, it must reduce the amount that I owe them, so it must be put in brackets. If you now look back at the general ledger that I have here, and if you look back at the statement that I have here, you can see that they are full of circles and crosses and things like that, but there is no number that has not been crossed off. We've dealt with every error, we've dealt with everything that we've left out, and we've dealt with everything that they've left out. So guess what? Now comes the moment of truth. We need to check that our two balances are now reconciled, that what we owe Rhonda's Roses in our books matches what appears on the Creditors Reconciliation statement. So the way we do that is there are two steps. Let's first balance Rhonda's Roses account in the general ledger. So have a look at this balance in the ledger of Rhonda's Roses. We're going to balance and total this general ledger by looking at the debit side and looking at the credit side, and you know how to do it. It's some grade 10 work that you already are very familiar with. But I've just noticed something, and I wonder if anybody's noticed it as well. Remember that our information book stated very clearly that every single check payment that we make, have a look over here, every single or each check payment that is made will contain a 10% discount. So in other words, every single time we pay a check, we are going to get a 10% discount on that check. So if you look at the general ledger of Rhonda's Roses, you will see here that there are 1, 2, 3 payments that we've made. 3 bank entries that we've made. But guess what? There are only 2 discounts received. There's something wrong here, and we have to fix that error before we balance and total and check that our amounts match. So, can you see that we've not recorded one of the discounts, even though on my information book I've crossed out everything? This is because I by mistake crossed out this amount of 121 when we updated it in the accounts of Bloomingdale, when we put it on the Creditors Reconciliation statement. What I did not realize is that that 121 did not appear anywhere here in the Creditors Ledger of Rhonda's Roses. So there should have been an amount here, a discount. There should have been a third discount that appeared in our books. So let's fix that up. We need another discount received, because there has to be one for each payment that's been made. And remember, once again, discounts received go in the CPJ. Remember also that that amount of 121 Rand that appears here as this discount was wrong. Remember, it was incorrectly calculated, and remember that we fixed it to be 242 Rand. That is the amount that needs to be recorded here. 242 has to appear on this side, and now we finally have 3 discounts and 3 bank accounts. Mindset is it's very easy to make a mistake when you are comparing accounts between creditor statements and your own statement. It's very easy to forget something. So my advice is check it thoroughly, check it accurately, and then at the end it should balance. So once again, let's now see whether it does balance. We're going to look at this general ledger, and we're going to identify which of the 2 sides is likely to be the bigger side. I normally add the positive side first, because usually your balances end up being brought down on the positive side. So let's have a look at the amounts on the credit side of this ledger. 2,000 plus 350 plus 1,001 plus 1,001 plus 3,850 plus 5,200, and the answer comes to 12,401 Rand. So that's our total for the credit side. So I'm going to write it down here. I'm going to leave a line underneath 12401. Now let's look at the debit side. The debit side is 342 plus 2420 plus 3630 plus 363 plus 4050 plus 405, and then plus the one we almost forgot, plus 242. Gives me an answer of 11,452 Rand. We know that that 11,452 is less than the 12,401, so we know that the 12,401 is going to be the total for both sides, so let's put it in, 12401. And we know that we're going to have something called a balance carried down, which is the number that makes the 2 sides equal. And we also know that on the very next month, which is the 1st of July, we are going to have a balance that's brought down on the credit side, and that's what we expected because the creditors control account is a liability. So we expect positive balances to end up being brought down on the positive side. All we now need to do to balance this account is to check and see what the balance carried down is. The way we're going to do that is going to take the 12,401 and subtract all of these other numbers. But look, they're already in my calculator because we added them all together to get 11,452. So to work out the difference, we can simply subtract the 12,401. Doesn't matter whether we get a negative or a positive answer, because remember, when you're subtracting one number from another, you're working out the difference between those two numbers. The answer comes to 949 Rand, so we know that our balance brought down and our balance carried down are both going to be 949. So now is the moment that we're all waiting for to check to see whether we balance. This is the number we want to get to, the 949. I'm sure you've all had that feeling in a balance sheet or in a bank reconciliation statement, checking to see whether or not you balance. Let's go and see whether we do indeed balance, because we're going to now go to our reconciliation for the account. And all we need to do here is calculate the answer to the sum to get the balance that we want at the end, and that balance is going to be the balance as per creditors ledger, which, remember, Mindsetters, is the one from our account. We don't put it in here. We're going to calculate it and check to see that it does indeed add up to the number that we think is in our creditors ledger, to that magical 949 Rand that we are hoping that we get. So let's do the sum. Clear everything on the calculator here. We started off with a balance of 13017. We're going to subtract 300. We're going to subtract 42 because those figures are in brackets, minus 2310, minus 4840, minus 121, minus 4050, minus 405. Going to cross our fingers and hope when we press equals, and there it is, 949 Rand. We've got the number that we've hoped we've gotten, and so we can just fill it in, and now we're done with the question. Keep practicing, keep trying, and I hope all your accounts always balance. Good luck, and we'll see you next time. Chances are that you'll understand the other one very well as well. Then, of course, Mindsetters, we're going to get to the whole important point of preparing a creditor's reconciliation statement. Remember, in accounting, you have to prepare various statements like income statements, bank recon statements, balance sheets, and today we're going to teach you a new one, a creditor's reconciliation statement. That's the whole objective of reconciling your creditors. And then finally, what's also important is to update your creditors control account in the general ledger, because your creditors control account is exactly what the name implies. It's something that keeps control of your creditors. It measures or it records how much money we owe our creditors at a specific time. But I'm sure you all know that by now, because in grade 10 you had to do the general ledger in a lot of detail. So today you're going to apply some of that grade 10 knowledge to the grade 11 concept of creditors reconciliation. Now let's have a look at some of the important theory that you're going to need to revise and that you're going to need to cover. So the first thing that's important is that the creditor sends out what we call a statement of account. The creditor, remember, that's the person that we owe the money to, is going to send us at the end of every month a statement of account which tells us, listed in columns, how much money we owe that creditor at the end of the month. Obviously, if you have somebody who owes you money, you need to send out regular reminders to keep them knowing that they owe you some money, and you need to work out how much money they owe you at the end of every month. You've done this before in grade 10. In grade 10, you remember your creditors ledger. You started with an account rendered, and you also did an account rendered for your debtors ledger. Now, those accounts rendered in the debtors ledger have to be sent. Might make sure that your workers are doing their jobs by putting in one of those clocking systems, making them sign in and sign out every day. Creditors reconciliation is another example of internal control, And the whole purpose of this is to check that our creditors are not overcharging us. If you think that you owe a shop 100 Rand and suddenly they send you an account for 1,000 Rand, you're going to get a huge fright because that's 900 Rand more than you think you owe them. However, if you've kept track of what you owe your creditors and you do a creditors reconciliation, as I'm going to show you later on, you're going to be able to account for the differences between what you think you owe the creditor and what the creditor thinks you owe the creditor. That's very, very important because if somebody's made a mistake, that mistake has to be corrected. Otherwise, you might end up paying that creditor the 1,000 Rand and then you've lost 900 Rand because you didn't do your bookkeeping, you didn't do your accounting correctly. So, the whole purpose of it, you may have heard of the word reconciliation before. Reconciliation, we've had in bank reconciliation. When you reconcile something, you sort of bring it together. You make sure that your balance in your books matches what the creditor thinks you owe the creditor in the creditor's books. You bring the two balances together and then you say that they are reconciled. So the whole purpose is that we are trying to check that what we think we owe the creditor actually matches the statement so that we agree. We are reconciled that this is the amount that we have to pay our creditors. Now, very importantly, just like with bank reconciliation, there are two types of errors. There are two parties in this transaction. There's me and there's my creditor. In your accounting terms, it's the business whose books you're doing and the business. The creditor's control account is for all your creditors, but the creditor's ledger is for individual creditors. And that's our next point over there. It says that the balance of an individual creditor's account is recorded in his or her creditor's ledger. What's very, very important to remember, mindsetters, is that your creditor's control account has to balance with all of your individual creditors. So you add up all your individual creditors at the end of the month and get a total, and that total has to match your creditor's control account in the general ledger. Individual creditors have to add up to the total. If they don't, then there's something wrong, and you would have to go and check all of the different transactions, not only in your CJ, in your CAJ, in your CPJ, in other words, all the different journals, but also how you've posted them to the general ledger, and also what you have done in your books for your individual creditors. That is why it's called a creditor's control account, because it helps you control your creditors. It helps you find out if there is a problem. And once you found out that there's a problem, that some entry has not been recorded correctly, you just fix it and make sure that the total balances. Now, what we need to understand is that creditors reconciliation, just like bank reconciliation, is what we call an internal control procedure. I'm sure you've studied the section in your textbook on internal control, which explains to you that a business is going to put controls in place to make sure that bad things don't happen, to make sure that there is no fraud, to make sure that money is not stolen, to make sure that money does not go missing or disappear. We would have lots and lots and lots of different types of internal controls. For instance, you might put a camera in your storeroom to check that nobody is stealing your stock, or you might out to your debtors to remind them how much money they owe you. In this case, you are the creditor and you are sending reminders to the debtor to let them know how much money they have to pay you. They are going to look at that statement and they are going to do a reconciliation with their own creditor's ledger. Remember, it's the same thing if you've got a sister and you're a male, your sister has got a brother and you have got a sister. The same way, debtors and creditors work in interchangeable ways. If you are my creditor, I am your debtor. You're my creditor because I owe you money, and I am your debtor because I'm a person who owes you money. Remember that and make sure you don't get confused between what a debtor is and what a creditor is. So, what we need to be aware of is that we keep track of our creditors in a special account which is known as the creditor's control account. I want to ask you to think for a few seconds, what type of account is a creditor's control account? Is it an asset? Is it a liability? Is it an income? Is it an expense? What is it? Think carefully about it. Sure, you've got the answer by now. A creditor's control account is a liability account because it keeps track of the money that we owe our creditors. And what's more, it keeps track of how much is owed to all our creditors in total. So it's the grand total of everything that we owe our creditors at the end of a specific period. You'll also remember, just a recap of grade 10 work, a recap of some of the grade 10 work that you have covered. The creditors control account is for all your creditors, and you keep individual accounts of each of your separate creditors in a different book, which is called the creditors ledger. So remember, hi Mindsetters, and welcome to another grade 11 Learn Extra accounting lesson. Today's topic is going to be the very important topic of creditors reconciliations. This topic, Mindsetters, is very, very similar to a topic that you already know and that you are familiar with, bank reconciliation. But it's also something that you're going to carry through to your grade 12 year, so it's something that you're going to need to understand in grade 11 and master in grade 11, so that next year when you're in matric, the workload becomes so much less because you've already mastered an important section of the syllabus. So today we're going to look at some key concepts, and specifically we're going to understand the need for a creditors reconciliation. In other words, why are we wasting our time or spending our time doing this? There has to be a reason for us to do our accounting, and we're going to see today what the need is to do such a creditors reconciliation. Secondly, we're also going to look at the similarities between your creditors reconciliation and another topic that I'm sure you all know how to do, bank reconciliation. Really, Mindsetters, what you need to remember is that a creditor is a person that we owe money to. So in other words, it's a person that we've bought stock from and we owe them money, we're going to have to pay them back. How is that similar to a bank? Well, remember, you know that you can sometimes go into overdraft. If you go into overdraft, you've spent more money than you have. So actually, you owe the bank money, so you can see the bank as a type of creditor. So what you will learn from today's show is that bank reconciliation and creditors reconciliation are two very similar concepts, and if you understand one, the